Dr. Julie Bell has a unique and powerful blend of how she both coaches professional athletes as well as business professionals to perform at their best when it matters most. She has a doctorate in sports psychology and she's an entrepreneur herself. In this podcast, we talk about everything from her business, The Mind of a Champion, to her book, Performance Intelligence at Work, to her philosophies on life and business performance for entrepreneurs. You're going to love this podcast. Well, Dr. Julie Bell, welcome to the podcast. Can you kick us off by telling us a little bit about your company and Mind of a Champion and how things got started, a little bit about your philosophy?
Let's see where we can start. So I have a coaching firm in Dallas, Texas, the Mind of a Champion, where we help people perform their best when it matters most. We meet people every single day who want to be a champion, and they have talent and a desire to win, but it's just not enough in today's competitive environment. Whether you're competing in sports, in business, or the demands of life are competing for your time, mindset matters, and that's what we help people with.
You bring over a lot of the sporting philosophy. You have a doctorate in sports psychology, I saw. Tell us about how did you come into that niche and a little bit of the story of the transfer from sports psychology to business psychology.
Absolutely, I'd love to. So I'll tell you first how I ended up in sports psychology. I had a fantastic advisor at Oklahoma State University. Go Cowboys. And I loved psychology, but I could not do therapy, counseling all day. It just didn't fit my personality. And she called me into her office one day and she said, "You should look into sports psychology. It's all the cool stuff about the brain, but it's on the where are you now and where do you want to go side of things rather than the diagnosis and analysis." So I went to the library and as a college student and I read professional journals for about 3 hours, unassigned reading. And so you have found your passion when you're a college kid reading on your own professional journals, things that aren't assigned to you. So that's how I got into the field. And it's been an interesting journey. When I was in graduate school, I really thought I would just work with athletes all my life. In fact, I thought I would be a professor. And then when I was a senior or finishing up my doctorate, I was at a conference and I was with a whole bunch of professors. And I looked around the room and I thought, nope, this is not for me. So I decided I would go into business for myself. Now, realize I had never taken a business class in my life. So I was finishing my dissertation and I took a sales job. Everybody needs a sales job. Would you guys agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yes, at some point in your life, you have to have a sales job. Well, the cool timing of it was that everything that I learned in sports psychology about how the limits that we have on ourselves are really in our thinking. I had studied that for 4 years and I applied it to myself in this sales job. And February comes around, I'm at the national sales meeting. I've been with the organization for 2 months and there was an award for the number of appointments set and I won it. I had outperformed everyone else by over 100 appointments. And the reason was I was told to set appointments. So I did. And everyone else who knew better, they knew that people won't set appointments in January and February. So other people weren't calling. I continued to use that philosophy in my sales. And I stayed in sales for 1 year while I finished my dissertation and got some great sales awards and then moved into starting my own company.
What was that company, Julie?
The company was the Mind of a Champion. So I started right out the gate with the Mind
Oh,
of a
wow. So how long ago was that? I mean, this is Mind of a Champion's now been in business for how long?
Since 94.
Great.
Do that math for me.
That's fantastic. So for 16 years, you've had the Mind of a Champion. You went directly in Mind of a Champion. Did you go back to your sports roots in terms of sports psychology, or did you move to business right away?
Well, I did marketing in country clubs because that's what you do. So golfers and tennis players. So I jumped in, I did some free programs. And what I learned was that everyone in the room was also a business professional. And so in my very first marketing event, I had the president of Brunswick Outdoor Recreation, and he said, I want you to come and work for my company 3 days a week. We're buying a bunch of companies, and I need you to tell them how to think differently. And so I clarified with him, I have never taken a business class in my life. And he said, do the golf talk, and I'll fill in the blanks. So I like to say I got this postdoctorate fellowship in entrepreneurship and business leadership. I traveled with him. I think later we found out that the reason he hired me is because his direct reports were afraid to speak after him. And I was young and didn't know any better. So I was like, sure, I'll speak after him. But he would say, hey, you all, we bought you because you're not doing very well. Now here's Julie to teach you how to think differently. And so I learned why companies failed. I learned what to do to change companies to get them to perform better. And I certainly learned about leadership and customer service. Jim was amazing at teaching about who is for a line worker. So you're putting together fishing reels, and he would say, who is your customer? And they would say, the person right next to me. So there were just so many great lessons in that. He was a genius to hire me 3 days a week because he said, I want you to build your own company the other 2 days. And that's what I was able to do. Just learning the business side of things, doing the sport talk, but then figuring out how to apply it to business.
Well, that's fantastic. I do want to jump back, Rich, and we both had a pretty interesting reaction to this too at the same time when you said everybody needs to have a sales job at some point in their career. I'd love to hear more on why you believe that is necessary for people in their business careers. And Rich, I'd like to hear your perspective on it as well, because we all had a very interesting reaction to that.
Sure. So here's why I think everybody needs a sales job. So you go to school and you're an attorney or you're a chiropractor or really anything. If you don't know how to sell your services, you won't get to do your job. So we all need to learn how to package what we're doing to tell the story interestingly enough so that somebody wants to buy your services or product. I think it's great. We need to learn how to get over call reluctance. We need to learn how to be upfront and honest in what we're selling. We need to learn how to set expectations high and deliver higher. I just think it's an important lesson. Rich, I'd love to hear your point of view.
I feel like I learned how to accept rejection and continue moving forward. And that success was the more no's you get, the closer you are getting to a yes. So a no did not mean to pack up and go home. What a no meant was keep going. That's not a natural response. People aren't born out of the womb thinking when I'm told no, that's a motivating thing. I think other things that I learned in sales were how to read other people, how to listen better to what they really wanted. I think every young salesperson falls into the trap of selling features and benefits of what it is that they're offering, a product or a service. And just those features and benefits that they're selling without listening first are a disconnect for the customer. And what you actually need to do is listen to the customer, listen to what their needs are, and prune your features and benefits to what their actual unique needs are. So I think there are some really important listening skills, learning to cope with rejection, understanding how you come off to others, and changing how you communicate something based on how you want them to receive it. Those are a few things that I feel I've learned. John, would love for you to weigh in as well.
Yeah, I mean, everything you guys are saying, I connect with 100%. And I see way too often people that I've hired in organizations or worked with say, well, I'm not good at sales. Or I don't like selling. I don't like putting myself out there. And at a young age to go into a sales role or even entrepreneurial role, if you could twist this another way and say everybody in their lifetime, especially earlier in their careers, should run a business. Because in a business, you have to sell, you have to market, you have to make sure you have money for payroll, you have to be responsible, you have to lead other people, you can gain all these skill sets. So I certainly believe everybody should have that sales experience because life is about sales. And Julie, you mentioned something that I thought was very, very good, which is I think when you start selling, you learn what you believe in and what you don't believe in. Because I'm sure some of us at some point of our life have had to sell something they don't believe in, and that's so difficult. And you then realize later on in your life, I don't want to do that. So if I'm going to do something, I want to believe in it. Because if you believe in it, to your point, Rich, you're not just selling the features and benefits, you're selling the story, you're selling your passion. And it's so much easier to do something when you believe in it. And all those experiences, I think, are what I gained by having sales jobs and or entrepreneurial, opportunities younger in my career.
Everyone is in sales, whether they know it or not, whether they accept it or not, whether they like it or not. Everyone is in sales, and specifically in selling ideas and selling themselves. We had to sell ourselves to our spouses, certainly, and continue to do that, right? We sell ourselves to our kids, ideas. We try not to use force in position with our children. When we parent, we try to use influence in relationship and sell the value of ideas and teach them to be independent. I think those concepts are deep seated in sales acumen.
Yeah.
So those are some additional reasons I think it'd be important.
Well, it's funny, and I'll bring this back to you, Julie. But you mentioned a really good point there. I mean, when you're selling something, you're trying to influence somebody to buy something. But leadership is influence, and entrepreneurship is influence to a certain degree because you're leading a group. So, Julie, if we come back to your business, you almost had a role with a certain group, but then you're building your company at the same time, and which is fantastic. And here you are with the mind of a champion in your business. And I want to hit on a couple of pieces here. One is your journey as an entrepreneur. So here you are starting your business and growing your business, and maybe some of the lessons you've learned along the way to build the mind of a champion. But then also, now that you work with businesses, you mentioned earlier, you learned why companies fail and some of the things that they go through in their journey and how they can be better. So I know there's a loaded question in there, but please start with your entrepreneurial journey and what are some of the big things you learned in growing a mind of a champion yourself as an entrepreneur?
Sure. So when I started out, I think I ran my company for a solid 10 years before I realized, oh, I'm running a company. So it was more than just me doing my thing, coaching and doing keynotes, that there's really a company here. And I can remember when that shifted in my mind. It was after I had children and I started thinking about, well, would I want my kids to be able to take over my company? And so that, entrepreneurship 101, you build it so that you can sell it, build it so you can pass it on. And so I started thinking differently about that. Along the way, I really had to understand my personality. So many entrepreneurs are visionaries, they're big picture, and they can get really excited about things. And so I had to learn to marry that with the practical business side, which is, again, going back to that sales side of things. Like there's a lot of good ideas, but it's not a great idea unless it's a revenue generating product or process for us. So I learned about my personality. I had to learn even with leading my team. I believe when I started, I had pretty high expectations of myself, and I can make mistakes. But when other people make mistakes that impact me, I was not very gracious as I would coach other people to do. Like, you need to coach people to improve their skill. And, I often had the mindset of, okay, somebody's getting fired today. Like, this mistake can never happen again. And what I realized is there's a much better way to have that conversation. And that is, hey, we need a winning game plan for, and then whatever it is. So one example comes to mind. I was going to a workshop. I needed workbooks shipped to this place. And I got there and they had not arrived. And so I was, fire angry mad and ready to have somebody, it was going to be their last day. And then I realized we need a winning game plan to get workbooks into workshops. And what I learned from that is I would call a workshop by the date. I would call it by the customer name. I would call it by my contact name. There was no naming scenario that a process for that. And so I was as much to blame as anybody else on that. But I just had to learn to manage I don't like the word manage, but to lead my personality, to maximize my strengths, but to certainly support my weaknesses with other people around me. And some lists are good for me too.
Yeah. And you mentioned something there too that I think is interesting. When you're a coach and you're coaching businesses, but then you're also an entrepreneur running your own business, I found myself sometimes too, as a leader, doing this where I'm giving somebody advice, and then when the meeting's over, I kind of look back at myself and go, "That was some really good advice. I should probably implement this myself."
One of my definite beliefs is that I have to take my own coaching. And so if I ask somebody to do something, I have to be willing to do it myself. Now, I don't always realize, like you said, you don't always realize you're not doing it. Just in the last month, I realized I always coach people to ask for referrals. Like, you need a process for asking for referrals. I had none. And so I realized that, and I thought, I need to take my own coaching on that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think there's another piece there, which is when you realize at that 10-year mark, you were working in your business, not on your business, which I'm sure is exactly what you talk to, a lot of the people you coach at in business, because that's certainly a trap that we all fall into as entrepreneurs. Is you're in the weeds working in your business, and then you got to look at working on your business. So what are some of the things you changed at that 10-year mark as well to kind of realize, okay, I'm running a business here? What are some of the key fundamental things you changed?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think the biggest part is it's a technique that I teach other people to do, is just have that leadership thinking time on my calendar. It's flexible. It's not negotiable, meaning it can get bumped to a different time. It can never get deleted. So I enjoy leadership thinking time in smaller amounts more frequently. So I have it on my calendar twice a week for 20 minutes each time. I look at my people, what next level, what's going on in the world, how are we needing to pivot, how are we going to skate to where the puck is. We're just looking forward. This past year in 2019, we already started doing virtual programs before anything happened with COVID. So I really felt like I was in a position of strength whenever we had the shift and nobody was meeting live anymore. And I got to help a lot of people figure some things out pretty quickly, just because we had 6 months experience doing virtual programs. So that was the biggest thing. Just the thinking time was so important, to not figure out what am I going to speak on the next time I'm in front of a group, but how am I going to run my company? That kind of thinking time.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, Rich, we were talking a little bit earlier about, preparation and all the, events you have going on this week, and the preparation time it takes not only to be a coach, but also on your own business. So Rich, I know you live that a lot in terms of preparation. And if you don't have the right program in place for your business or what you're about to do, you're going to have a bad performance for not only your business, but your events.
Reminds me of a quote I like, which is preparation for opportunity equals success. I think you and I learned that one, John, together maybe 25 years ago-ish. I'm curious for you to expand on, Julie, the leadership thinking time. You do it at 20 minutes, 2 times a week. What are some categories of things or some core questions that someone listening to the podcast would want to take note of if they wanted to use this idea of leadership thinking time? Like, what do I do with that time?
So I'm very direct on this when I'm working with people. It's a blank sheet of paper time. So there's not a to-do list. There's not a check the box. It's just a blank sheet of paper, and allowing your brain some time to be creative and to download. I will put a little box down at the bottom, and if I remember that I need to run to the grocery store, I'll write that down real quick so that my brain can go back to just thinking. And I'll ask myself more questions. What are people going through? Sometimes I'll go through people in my list, which are my team. Sometimes I'll go through clients in my head. Other times I'll just draw circles or doodle until something comes to mind. But I really do like that clean sheet of paper just to give your brain some creative time.
That's great.
And can I do a teaching point right here? Because
Absolutely.
thank you. All of the, as you can see, I was going to do it whether you gave me permission or not.
Oh, please, yeah.
That's the sales experience coming through.
That's
How's the assumptive close?
right.
So one of the things that's happened since everybody's been sheltering in place and working from home is we're not driving anymore. And there was a lot of time to be creative in your brain when you were driving because you're just looking at the clouds. I mean, I know a lot of times you're catching up on phone calls, but just time to drive to and from work, your brain got to be creative, and we don't have that time anymore. And I think it's impacting what we're doing. So I would encourage anybody to be creative, color, uh, sew, cook something, like just figure out a way to be creative so that your brain can get back in that groove, and you're going to see ideas coming back into your life again.
That's great. I've never thought of driving time in that way, but that's so accurate. Something you said earlier that I'd love to hear more on also is you had said the limits that we have are on our own thinking. Tell us more about that.
Well, I'll take one from the example from the Mind of a Champion. So I can remember a client calling and saying, asking me to give a proposal to coach 150 people. And I was like, cha-ching, right? That's my first thought. We're going to make some money. And then my second thought was, wait a minute, I don't want to talk to 150 people. So I had to think differently about it. And what I realized in that situation was, when I was doing coaching, I used a billable hour mindset. In sports psychology, we were trained through the counseling model, which is you have to talk for 50 minutes or you can't bill for it. And then Microsoft Office and iCal default to 1 hour appointments. And so I just assumed that's what I'm supposed to do is 1 hour appointments. And I ended up switching to relationship-based coaching, which isn't about billable hours or a transactional model. It's all about the relationship, and it looks different for different people. I couldn't have gotten to that idea, that relationship-based coaching idea. We're the only one out there that does it, but I couldn't have gotten to that idea without looking at what my current limitations were in my mind. Of course you have to coach for an hour, and there's a ton of leaders that believe that you have to spend an hour with your employee to call it coaching or leadership development. And honestly, it's not a great model.
What is relationship-based coaching? I think the billable hour mindset, and everybody can probably relate to, okay, I work an hour, I talk to somebody for an hour, I bill an hour. What's relationship-based coaching? How do you focus differently as a coach when you're relationship-based, and what does billing look like in that?
So we bill per relationship. We bill 3 months or a 6-month relationship. And then I start every relationship with an in-depth conversation. Where are you now? Where do you want to go? How did you get here? Just learning about people. And then we prioritize on what we want to change. And I'm not big on assessments because I think the way people tell the story is more important than the story itself. And so I'm just listening as people are telling their story, and I'm finding out where you're talking to me and you're telling me about your organization. And then you start telling me about something else. And you're saying, we try to do this. And that's a word that doesn't communicate confidence. So I'm just listening to the way people are telling the story. I'm making some observations. And then we figure out a winning game plan in terms of frequency and duration of coaching. To get to that next level. The bigger the change, the more frequent the coaching. The more frequent the coaching, the lower the duration. So in it over a 3-month or over a 6-month period, it can look different. So we'll establish a cadence of coaching based on desired results.
The way people tell a story is more important than the story itself. That really stuck out to me, and I took a note on it. Tell me more.
So let's say in just in whatever what's an area of your life you want to improve or change?
Name one I don't.
You just get to pick one.
An area of my life that I want to improve or change. I would like to improve my consistency in eating habits, and I'm doing that relatively well now by tracking food intake every day.
Awesome.
But that's something I continue to want to try to improve.
Okay. And then, John, how about for you? What's something you want to improve or change?
I think it's parental discipline
How old are your kids?
around certain components of of my kids' education and upbringing that sometimes I slide a little too much, and I feel like I need to kind of tighten up.
Oh, I had a babysitter one time who was so good at following my rules because I wasn't great at following my rules, and she was. I mean, she was awesome. I totally get where both of you guys are coming from. So, as I would ask you questions about eating habits or ask you questions about uh, parenting and your plan around that, I'm going to hear where you believe in what you're doing and where you don't. I'm going to hear you exaggerate your mistakes and minimize your success. I'm going to just hear different parts of your story because I'm focused on results through thinking changes, not necessarily through behavior changes. So I'm not going to tell you, here are the 3 things you need to do to be a better parent. I'm going to listen to your story. I'm going to help you think differently about what you're doing to increase your consistency. Both of you guys are talking about consistency in what you're doing. So to increase your consistency, I need to hear your story and be able to help you change your thinking.
Results through thinking changes. Are there some principles involved in that that are kind of the tried and true? Like, here are the attributes of thinking changes, or the approach to thinking changes that people could take note of, or I could take note of.
Sure. So we do a 3-step process. We recognize our thinking. So part of you telling the story is helping us recognize your thinking. And then we teach people how to refocus. I used to think this way and now I think that way. There was a product that I did not like to sell in my sales job, and I had hit every goal and I could not sell this sweatshirt. It was ugly, and that's why I couldn't sell it. And so what I ended up doing is finding out why people would buy it. Like, why would anybody want this? It was a fundraiser sweatshirt. And when I found out why people would buy it, I was able to sell it. I didn't have to like it. I just needed to know why other people liked it. So that's an example of refocusing. And then once we recognize our thinking, refocus, then we teach people how to have routines or habits of the mind. Your brain is wired to work on habits. It wants to conserve energy. And every time you think, you have to use energy. If you've ever driven home from work with your dry cleaning in your car because you're going to drop off your dry cleaning, and then you drove into your driveway with your dry cleaning sitting there, you know how much your brain likes habits. Like, it just wants to go home the way it goes home. So we teach people how to set up new habits of their mind to help them think differently.
I do remember the 3 R's from the book that you had sent me. Thank you, on performance intelligence at work. And the 3 R's are right in there. So thanks for that reminder. Can you talk to us about, with your book, Performance Intelligence, and speaking of those 3 R's, what is performance intelligence, and where can that be applied?
So, performance intelligence is your ability to perform your best when it matters most. And of course, I ask people, when does it matter most? Just about all the time, especially in today's competitive environment. So, in order to allow you to perform your best when it matters most, you have to understand confidence, you have to be able to focus. Train confidence, you need to be able to direct your focus, you need to understand how to create a winning game plan and execute it. Your competitiveness needs to be aligned in this win-win. It's about you taking your game to the next level rather than always competing with somebody else. And then self-discipline, which would be accountability. And we believe in this voluntary accountability versus business type of accountability where somebody else holds you accountable.
Yeah, Julie, we talked about this a little bit earlier in your background in sports psychology and bringing that to business. And I'm very big into sports myself personally, and as you're talking here, and even talking about what you just said, competitiveness, and all the different traits when you want to perform your best when it matters most. I mean, I can just visualize you working with athletes, and relating that to business owners or entrepreneurs or leaders. And, we all know that a lot of sports analogies or leadership skills or traits relate directly to business and vice versa. A lot of the business traits lead to sports leadership. Can you tell us a little bit more about that parallel you see between an athlete or sports and an entrepreneur in business?
Oh, absolutely. So I love to use sports examples in teaching entrepreneurs and teaching business owners, business leaders. I'll give you a real specific example. So I was working with a professional athlete and I was helping him recognize his thinking. It was a professional golfer. And so I said, hey, I'm going to interview your clubs. Well, golf clubs can't talk, so you're going to have to interpret for your golf clubs. And we had a really funny text going back and forth on this. And he ended up, his most interesting club was his 6-iron. And the interview went something like, I'm not his favorite. We usually have to, I don't spin a lot. We usually have to play to the middle of the green. And if he's not committed, I can lead to a bogey. And so we went through this process. We're like, okay, that guy's not coming out of your bag unless we think differently. And I believe you cannot lie to yourself consistently. So we had to find a truth that was a different story. A different story gets different results. And so the story for the 6-iron was, I am who I am. I don't spin a lot, so we play to the middle of the green. He loves his putter so much that I am good for his game when he needs me. And so that whole story. So I'll share that with a business leader and they're like, oh, that's funny, laugh a little bit. And I go, okay, here's the website. And I just put up all of your products. What if I interviewed your products or your services, depending on the organization? What would they say? Some products are like, I am the favorite. And other products are, excuse me, may I introduce myself to you? I could make you a lot of money if you would just get to know me. So that's one example of how I can use a sports story and then it opens the door for people to be in a position to receive and learn on their own business. But I take models out of sports all the time in terms of coaching and just confidence. We can use sports examples all the time in everything that I talk about.
Yeah, and I'm not so sure that you do exactly this, but I can just visualize you working with a business and a team and interviewing their products and services as a group, and how dynamic that session would be with the company and all the different opinions and small groups responding on behalf of the products and services. That'd be hilarious and enjoyable. And the whole team would, have laughter, but then there'd also be a level of seriousness to the service that's saying, hey, what about me? You guys are forgetting about me. I can make you a lot of money. I love that.
Absolutely. Super interactive. It's very insightful. And there's some products that are like, why are you mad at me all the time? So you can get a lot of good information that way.
Can you expand, Julie, on of the things that you had mentioned earlier? Can you expand on competitiveness and what is a healthy approach to that? And what is a not so healthy approach to that you notice in the people who you coach?
Thank you for that question. So I would say what a lot of people think of competitiveness is just me beating you, whether it's individually or organization. My company wants to be better than your company, or I want to be better than you. And so when competitiveness is really focused on comparison, I don't think that is a healthy view of it. Great athletes, great coaches, great teams have taught me that when I'm focused on where I am now and my next level, so I'm pushing myself to my next level, my organization to our next level, that is a healthy competitiveness. When we're only comparing, we're always going to be better than someone and we're always going to be below someone. So it's just much better to see what our potential is and then use our competitiveness for that personal best, that drive to be better than what we are today.
Boy, I love that. The whole idea of competing against your next level, reminds me of the story that I've heard about the two people running a track race, and the person who comes in second place loses by the half a second. And, the two reporters rush up. One goes to the winner, the other one goes to the loser. The reporter that's talking to the loser says, oh man, you were right there. By a half a second, you lost it. How did that feel? Are you disappointed you couldn't just cut that out just at half a second? And the person goes, disappointed? Are you kidding me? That's actually a second and a half faster than I have ever run that distance before. That's the best I've ever done in my entire life. I couldn't have done any better. I'm ready to celebrate. And it's really the difference between competing against your personal best versus competing against others. And I know, John, you've had experience with that to the point in terms of sports. Do you have an example where you've seen people you've coached in sports or even yourself where competitiveness has either been on the right side of it or the wrong side of it? And how did that impact results?
Yeah, we see it all the time. There's certain people in sports that are looking to beat the next person or be better than the next person. There are people that just worry about their own lane and their own development because people develop differently. And we see it a lot in college athletics, where players at a younger age may get committed to a Division I scholarship at a certain school, and then all the other parents start freaking out that their kid's not good enough yet. When in reality, a few years later, if they just focus on their own development and their own path, they're on the right track. But they're so worried about what the others are doing and what the others are achieving versus themselves. And that happens, you talk about, as well, the comparison versus your own next. And I think we are living in a world today, even with, the social media and the social dilemma we now have, right, where people are looking for how many likes do we have and all those other things, that there is a very big comparison society right now. And I think what you said as well is there's always people above you and there's always people below you. Just worry about your best and you'll be a lot happier. Is a pretty big statement. It doesn't matter if it's sports, business, or personal.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right on the social dilemma, all of the social media and all that, and not just in sports where we're comparing ourselves, but just think about in business. You've got two team members, and one's been with you a year, and one's been with you a month. If they're comparing themselves to each other, your 1 year person is going to slack off, and your 1 month person is going to be frustrated and want to quit. They're just not going to be at the same level.
Yeah.
And the flat out reality is you can't do any better than your best. You can't. And literally what other people do is totally irrelevant to doing your absolute personal best in the sports analogy of leaving it all on the field. If you've left it all on the field and you literally can't do any more, you win. It doesn't matter what the result is. When it comes to focus, can you speak to that on the positive side and the unhealthy side? I know we've seen some entrepreneurs that focus can become obsessive, and that has results versus being disfocused on the other end of the spectrum. Where is that sweet spot between disfocus and obsessive, and how do you coach your people on that, Julie?
When I'm working with people on focus, I really teach them just two principles. One, we have to focus on what to do versus what not to do. It's amazing how often we focus on what not to do, don't forget, versus remember to. So we have to really pay attention to what we want to accomplish. We need to identify our mistakes with a sentence, and we need to have conversations about our corrections, that what to do. That works in parenting also. And then the second thing that I talk about with focus is playing to win versus playing not to lose. And this is especially true with entrepreneurs. So that playing to win is all about having a plan and then executing the plays on your plan. Then we find out, did you win or not win? And so if you win, great, keep doing it. If you didn't win, then the first question we have to ask is, did you play the game, right? Did you execute on all of your plan? If the answer to that question is yes, you need to change your plan. So playing to win is all about executing plays. Playing not to lose is so worried about the outcome that you stop playing the game. So it's obsessive focus about the outcome versus what you're doing, the activity to change the outcome. Playing not to lose is tentative, it's defensive, it's not motivating, high stress, high burnout when you're playing not to lose versus playing to win.
Yeah, Julie, you're hitting something. I was listening to a podcast even this morning on my run, and we do live in an outcome-based society right now. Even kids in school are asking the teachers, "Is this on the test? If so, I'll study hard. If not, I won't." It's a certain thing that's in our society right now that I think exists, and we'll probably be here for quite a while. But interpersonally, as you're thinking about yourself and what you're doing, if you're so focused on the outcome, you're not going to have as much pleasure in pursuing the journey.
Well, and you won't stick to your plan. So let's go back to health, right? So anytime, and we're coming up on the new year, and everybody's going to say lose weight, number one New Year's resolution. And so you get on the scale, and if the scale doesn't change, you give up. But we know that you have to continue the process to be able to see the results down the road. The first time you go to the gym, you're not going to walk in and look different in the mirror. So we have to be committed to the process for a season, and then watch the results as they happen.
Yeah, Julie, earlier in the conversation, again, you talked about how you had a chance to witness firsthand over the years, why some businesses fail, what they can do to be better. Let's transition to that a little bit. I mean, if there's a couple of learnings you've seen that have been pitfalls for entrepreneurs or their businesses, what are they?
I'm going to have to go with leadership matters. So when a leader is not or doesn't have a plan or is not committed to a plan, that doubt grows exponentially in the team. So 80% confidence is 20% doubt. If a leader has 20% doubt, they're going to communicate to their team that we're going to sort of kind of try to maybe do this plan, which is not executed. That plan is not executed. So if there is just one lesson across the board, all industries that I work with, that leadership matters. The leader needs to know what they're doing, and they need to be able to communicate with confidence.
You have suggestions on having a plan, and often you hear leaders need to have a vision. What are the elements to expressing a vision? How do people do that? Is that just saying, oh, in 10 years, I see us being at X dollar amount in revenue, and I see everybody in here being a vice president? There's a vision. We're done. Like, how does that work, expressing a vision as a leader in the context of leadership matters?
I believe that the vision is all about the passion of what you want, the belief of where you can go. But I also believe that it needs to be supported. So if I said, we're going to triple revenue in 2021, and I can get really excited about it, and I can communicate that with my team, they would just look at me like, and how are we going to do this? So the vision is that passion. It's what's driving you. It's what gets you up in the morning. It's exciting, and it could be an outcome focused, or it could be about impacting lives. So it really could be any type of vision. It's just what's important now. And then the plan is how you're going to get there. And I do believe, and we teach a winning game plan, which is depending on your desired results, your plan will be different. So your winning game plan leads with your desired results. But just like a coach going into a season, they create a winning game plan for their team, but they're allowed to tweak their plan throughout the season based on the health of their players and the strength of the competition. And so I think that we need to have that same mindset in business, is that we need to have this great vision. We need to have a plan that gets there. And then the data points are our feedback. That helps us know where we need to up our game, where we need to tweak our plays, where we need to change the frequency of what we're doing.
Can you reiterate that? What were the elements of tweaking a game plan? And before you go there, the reason I ask is when there's a game plan in place, sometimes leaders follow it too rigidly. And again, I go to this paradox piece. Sometimes it's too rigid, and sometimes it's just way too flexible. And anything that comes up, it can change. Like, what are the elements of tweaking a game plan, and how oh, this is one of those moments where it's okay to deviate from my original game plan? It's actually a well-informed decision.
So I would believe it's based on results, but we have to ask a question between results and changing the plan. And that is, did we play the game? So did we execute the plays to our best ability, the plays that are in our plan? And if there are 10 activities that you're doing to hit your results, but you're only executing 7 of them, then you don't know if you should change your plan or not. Or if there's one key, asking for referrals, and we're going to sort of ask for referrals this month. Well, you sort of didn't ask for them also. It's one of those plays that was not communicated with confidence, and so people weren't doing it. They never even had a goal of how many referrals they were supposed to ask for. So if you're not executing your plays, you do not know if you should change your plan. Can I use a fishing example?
Please do.
So I've worked with some professional fishermen in my life. I have a Bassmaster champion as one of my clients.
Congratulations to you and
you.
the Bassmaster.
Thank you. When I started working with him, I'd say, if you're a basketball player, I would say this. And so I had to learn the language of fishing, and now I can talk about topwater spinnerbait or a drop shot. So it sounds like I know what I'm talking about. But I was working with some of my fishermen, and they talked about working an area. So fish have homes, and they're going to stay in their home unless there's a major shift in the weather or in the lake depth. So you work in an area where you think your fish are, but if in your mind you think you should be at a different area, then you're not really working your area. And as you get through the end of your area, you have to decide, do I go to the other place or do I do this one again? If you weren't focused on each cast, you have no idea what to do. And so that's executing a winning game plan. So focus on every cast. You get to the end and you're like, they're not here. I'm going to my other area. Or, you've gotten some bites, and so you work your area again. That's an example of a winning game plan. You have to execute in order to know if you should change anything.
Yeah, so it sounds like the first evaluation is, did you actually do the plan that you planned? And if not, grab your learning lessons and actually do the plan. But the second,
this is a good time of year. Sorry, Rich. This is a good time of year to do that. So a lot of people are thinking about their goals for 2021.
Yeah.
And we can be a little frustrated. It's like, oh, how am I going to do any better? I've done so great this year. I did this with my health not too long ago. And I was like, I can't exercise more and I can't eat any better. And then I thought, I'm only about 60% of execution on my plan. Like I'm above, midway. But if I would just, one or two more times a week, make better choices in my eating, that's all I have to do to be able to change the outcome. I think it's a great time of year to be reflecting on, did I actually do my plan?
Great example.
That's actually a really good area to go, because I think, as this podcast comes out, it will be the end of December or beginning of January, and people will be listening to this right at the time that they're probably thinking about their 2021 game plan. We've talked about a lot of different components here, but if you had to sum it up and you were talking to an entrepreneur listening to this right now, what would be the top 3 things you'd say, these 3 pieces need to be a part of your 2021 plan, in terms of, not exactly specifically what in the plan, but in terms of components of the plan? What would those be?
I would start with know where you're going, right? So we need to know what you want to accomplish. I think that has to be in any kind of plan. Second, I would say know the strengths of your team. I think a lot of times as leaders, as entrepreneurs, we are looking at the gaps in our team, but we also need to look at the strengths of them so that we can make sure we're playing, our people are in the right position. And then the third thing is, you got to be a great coach to your team, and you are on your own team. So this would be the number one priority lesson, is that voice in your head, it's not just self-talk, it's your coaching voice. So every person listening has a coach. And that voice in your head is either coaching you to greatness or it's coaching you out of the game. And so you have to make sure that you're as good of a coach to yourself as you are to other people, and that your coaching voice is bringing out your best.
Yeah. And Rich, we talked about this as well about a week or so ago, that, a lot of professional athletes have multiple coaches. I would actually say every professional athlete has multiple coaches. You got a strength coach, you got a speed coach, you got a mental coach, you got this. Yet entrepreneurs or leaders hesitate to have a coach other than the own voice in their head, and engage somebody like yourself to help them with the stories that are in their head and their own coaching. And so talk to us a little bit about that, because that's certainly something you provide your clients. And I'm sure you see the same thing from the sports analogy to the business side, that sometimes entrepreneurs are just hesitant.
Absolutely. Little league to Olympians in the sports world, we're all using coaches. Everybody is. Even your weekend golfer is using a coach. They're getting some lessons from a pro. But then we get into business and it's just this something foreign to us. I think people need a thinking partner, and whether that's someone that you're hiring professionally, like what we do at the Mind of a Champion, or you're in an entrepreneur group and you listen to each other's story. I think there's a lot of ways to get great coaching, but we need to be open to it. And back to that voluntary accountability, we need to know when we need coaching and ask for it. So in the coaching relationships that we have, we'll have some time scheduled on the calendar, but it really is a dynamic relationship where the best call we get is from one of our coaching clients that says, "Hey, do you have a minute? I need some coaching." And we're like, "Absolutely. I got 7 minutes. Let's go." So the knowing when you need coaching and reaching out for it's a skill that every entrepreneur needs to have.
Boy, that resonates with me. The best call is from someone who's identified they need coaching, and it's an impromptu call. Boy, and as any leader or any good coach who's ever received that, you go, yeah, absolutely. Let me drop what I'm doing. It's really hard to coach perfect people. And it's people who identify that they could use some coaching, they do want to get better, that we'd be willing to drop everything for. So that really resonated for me. I'm sure I've enjoyed this conversation an awful lot. I got a couple of pages of notes. I'm sure our listeners do too. I'd love to open up to you just kind of a parting shot, Julie, on anything that you would want to express to our listeners that you'd want to either reinforce of the messaging that we provided them today, or anything we haven't provided that you'd like to add on.
Well, I would obviously love for anybody to go to themindofachampion.com and look at the services that we do, both right now virtual keynotes. We do team coaching and we do individual coaching. Anything from a relationship to a text coaching with some accountability in there. We even help entrepreneurs coach their team. So we have a lot of different ways that we can come alongside the right organizations and help them win. And it's a joy to be able to do that, quite honestly. So I'd love for people to do that. But really, if I was going to do a parting message, it would be just to enjoy the game. Right? If we're not having a great time doing what we're doing, why are we doing it in the first place? And generally, people perform their best when they're having a good time.
That's
Well,
awesome.
when you say it's a joy to be able to do that, I got to say, of the guests that we've had on the podcast, I think you may have smiled two or three times as much as anybody else, including John and myself. And you could really, it comes through how much of a joy it is for you to do what you do and speak to the topics we've talked about today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I could tell you for myself, I definitely would love to talk to you a little bit more, Julie, about coming to one of the companies I'm involved with and just interviewing our services. I think that could be a blast.
I would love to do that. And I've got so many more things that you'll love doing too.
Great. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed being with you guys.
Hope you enjoyed the episode as much as Rich and I did. Stay on board for a couple more minutes as Rich and I break down the podcast.
So, John, I loved having Julie on. My assumption is you did too. What are a few of the highlights that you got from the conversation with her?
I certainly love the story side of coaching. Bringing a team together and having Julie come in and coach the team on interviewing your products or services and the energy that could be generated from that, but then also the opportunities that could be discovered, I thought was a phenomenal way to use stories, because you could do that in a group setting, but you can also do it individually. You can look at certain parts of your life and have stories with yourself and really think through, where are you not enjoying the game? Where are you not operating at a high level of performance? And I think that was a big thing that was very strong from Julie's message is you got to be careful about the stories you have in your head and how you can recognize those stories, refocus those stories, and have routines and habits to put them in the direction that you want those stories to actually be.
Yeah, and the example of the golf club, bringing a
Yeah, I love
voice
it.
bringing a voice to the golf club. Like I think of in my role, all of the different programs and trainings and things that we coordinate around the company, and how cool it would be to sit down with a select group of people and go, okay, what would each of these facets of how we train entrepreneurs, franchise owners, their staff, what would each of these programs, pieces be saying to us about how we use them or what they want for how to maximize the potential of them? I think that's, yeah, it's a fascinating thing I've never considered before. Um,
Yeah.
she mentioned a lot about like leading, and it was subtle, but it was like she mentioned early on leading my personality. And then later on in the podcast, she mentioned when you had asked the three things for entrepreneurs to look at:
Hmm.
be a great coach to your team and realize you are on your team.
Yeah.
Like it was subtle, but there was something to self coaching that was speaking to me in that around just the inner voice and being kind to ourselves and self compassionate and speaking to ourselves like a friend. Like all these things kind of came in for me, kind of in the background with some of what she was talking about.
Well, I mean, you've talked about this for years, Rich. The way we perceive the world are the stories we've told ourselves.
Yeah.
And once you can have a thinking partner, which I loved her words in calling you, instead of thinking about a coach, think about it as a thinking partner. Because when you think to yourself and you have the stories in your own head, they're very hard to change. But if you have a thinking partner, you can think those stories through, or a coach, you can think those stories through, you can really re energize and put those stories in the right buckets in the right direction in your life. And I'm one of those examples as an entrepreneur. Why do I need a coach? Stories I would say in my own head. I don't need a coach. I'm good. I have some people to talk to if I need to, but I don't really need a thinking partner. But instead, I have these stories in my head that I would be talking to and coaching myself on, and that probably wasn't the healthiest thing. And
Interesting
so
you
I
say
do
that.
believe if there's one thing that's coming across on even all the episodes we've had so far, Rich, is the ability to have thinking partners, other entrepreneurs you can get together around a table and talk to, or a coach you can talk to help direct those stories in the right direction, is something that more and more entrepreneurs hopefully are going to start doing, just like a professional athlete does. Professional athlete doesn't go into the gym and say, I know how to coach myself and how to be the fastest player on this team. They hire a speed coach. And I think it's really important that that continues to get articulated to entrepreneurs that we talk to on a daily basis, is the need for thinking partners.
Interesting you say that, and I'd love for you to expand on it, because I remember a call you and I had years ago. It may have been 5 years ago, 6 years ago now.
Yeah.
That just in you and I keeping in touch. I think I had asked you at one point, who are you using as a coach these days? And you said, rather confidently at that time, nobody. I'm not in that mode. I'm in like execute mode.
Yep.
Do you remember saying that? Because I
I
remember
do.
you saying that almost word for word, and it was a little striking to me at the time, and I never revisited it with you. But interesting time to do that. When you hear that back, and the fact that that kind of stuck out with me, paired with what you just shared, what comes to mind for you?
I was deep rooted in working in the business, is what instantly comes to my mind. I was operationally focused. I had no time to think, got to go operate, got to go make things happen. Wasn't working on myself. I'd push things aside if I had to do with stories myself, because I was so into the game, and not taking the, again, another thing that I really loved, that intentional time on your calendar for two
Mm.
times a week for 20 minutes where you're doing your leadership thinking time.
Yeah.
I wasn't doing that. And if I had a blank sheet of paper twice a week for 20 minutes that maybe I could move around my time block, as it was negotiable in terms of when it was, but it wasn't negotiable in terms of canceling it. If I had that intentional time, I probably would have been more intentional about who I'm talking to, or
Mm.
who I'm getting coaching from, or having a thinking partner. And I think that is the big gap that I had then, that I think a lot of entrepreneurs deal with today. Do they have leadership thinking time? And if they do have leadership thinking time, who are they thinking with?
So for
Are they
you in
just thinking
that,
with themselves, or do they have thinking partners or coaches they work with during that time?
totally. What suffered, either in the business or with other people or with you? What suffered because you didn't have a coach, or you didn't have that time to reflect on who you were talking to, or as much about being intentional where your influences were? What was impacted?
I'd say, Rich, without getting into specifics, because I can't recall the exact period of times,
Yeah.
but I would say my stories didn't change. I didn't recognize the stories I was telling myself that may or may not have been healthy. I didn't, I wasn't able to refocus the stories because no one was challenging my thought process on such stories. And therefore, I couldn't create the habits that maybe I needed to get those stories heading in the right direction. Exactly the 3 R's we just talked about with Julie were probably the things that were lacking. And so if you're not challenging your stories with anybody, with a coach or a thinking partner, then whatever stories you tell yourselves are the truth, because that's what you know. And I probably had massive blind spots because my stories weren't negotiable.
That's interesting. In a interesting revisit of the content from this podcast on the recognize, and that's needed, and then refocus, and then looking at routines. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and I don't think it takes a lot of time to, when you think about it, if we challenged ourselves and challenged our entrepreneurial listeners to go on your calendar right now, find 2 20-minute blocks that you call leadership thinking time, and make that one of your initiatives for 2021, and get that blank sheet of paper every time. And maybe some of those times, one time a week is yourself and one time a week is with a thinking partner. Find a thinking partner that you can then share your stories with. You do that twice a week for 20 minutes. I think you'd see a pretty big change in helping you refocus on that performance intelligence you need to really perform at a high level.
I'm in for the next 2 weeks. Would you be? To find 20 minutes 2 times a week for the next 2 weeks, sit down, no technology, just a blank sheet of paper, and just see what comes out on the sheet of paper.
Done. And let's revisit it in 2 weeks and report back.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Great guest. That's awesome.
Yeah, very good.